Chapter 4 of Tractate Yevamos covers some additional laws of the Levirate marriage. The Mishnah says there's a law instituted in regards to the Levirate marriage that Yibum should not be done within 90 days of the husband's death to ensure that the wife is not pregnant prior to the marriage. This would mean that chalitza cannot be done within this period either. If somebody did end up doing chalitza within this period to their brother's widow, and the widow, who as it turned out was actually pregnant, gave birth, as Yibum is not done if the wife has had a child, so the chalitza is thereby retroactively invalidated, and they can now legally marry each other's relatives, and she's still allowed to marry a Kohen. If the child was stillborn or similar, the chalitza actually was valid, so now they cannot marry each other's relatives, and she cannot marry a Kohen. If they did a Yibum and got married, and the woman was then found to have been pregnant and gives birth, they have to get a divorce, and they're liable to bring an offering in the temple. If the baby was stillborn or similar, they can stay married. If there's a question if the child was from the first brother's marriage or a premature child of the new second brother's Yibum marriage, they must divorce, bring an Asham Taloi offering, and the child is legitimate as both marriages were legally valid. The Gemara says a related point: if a brother does chalitza with his brother's pregnant widow, and she then miscarried, there's a debate if they need to redo chalitza based on if you hold the first chalitza was valid. Some say this debate is illogical as to whether we say that the retroactive non-viability of the child works, and some say it's disputed based on a verse. We try to prove from a number of related cases as to which one we hold like. There are further cases brought and disputed, however, in the end we say we hold like the ruling of Reish Lakish, who held that they need to redo chalitza. It also says in addition there are some other things we rule in accordance with the opinion of Reish Lakish, such as that when somebody is delineating their property to be given to their child and he wants to adjust the particular amounts, it's permissible if it's done as a gift and you specify that the term gift applies to both recipients. The other thing we rule like Reish Lakish is if a son has a pending inheritance from his still alive father and the son preemptively sells it and then dies while the father is still alive, Reish Lakish says this is a valid sale. Once the father dies, as he holds ownership of the rights to property, is not the same as owning the property itself. So the father did not actually own the property at the time of sale. Anyways, back to Yibum. We said if you marry somebody through Yibum, she's found to be pregnant, and the baby is stillborn, you can stay married. It says here that others disagree and require a divorce, and there are similar opinions cited. We say from a different source that if a child dies within 30 days, it's considered to have been non-viable, and this is used to discuss some related points. It also says if someone betroths a woman within 3 months of her leaving her first husband and then runs away, some say that they put a ban on him, which basically just means he's treated similar to a mourner. Some say this is sufficient to end the betrothal, which was ruled like by a case where this occurred. In the case where the child could have been born from either husband, it's where the woman gave birth at 7 months and her fetus wasn't noticeable at a third of the days of her pregnancy, so we don't rule with her like we would by majority. There are related points in regards to the uncertain status of some of these children. This is discussed along with some different inheritance disputes that can arise if a child is born within a time frame where it could have been from 2 different husbands. There are a few of such cases brought, and these are discussed further. New Mishnah. If a woman whose husband passed is waiting for her brother-in-law to do Yibum or not with her, and then she inherits property from her father, everybody agrees she can sell it or give it away. If she dies during this period, Beis Shammai says the marriage contract and the inheritance is split between the wife's family and her brother-in-law's family. Beis Hillel says everything stays with whoever owns it, so the marriage contract stays with her brother-in-law and the inheritance stays with her parents. If their brother-in-law did Yibum to marry her, they're considered married in all respects, besides that the marriage contract obligation stays on the estate of her first husband. The Gemara clarifies, according to the sage Ula, the difference between the first case, where everyone agrees that she receives her father's inheritance, is where the first brother died while she was an Arusa, the first stage of marriage, while the disputed case is where he died while she was a Nesua, the completed stage of marriage. Some disagree, specifically Rabbah, and say both cases are where she's a Nesua, having fully completed marriage, but the first case was where she's alive and has a definite claim, unlike the husband's heirs, while in the second case she died, so both claims are uncertain. This is further disputed, and the sage Abaya has his opinion, saying the first case is where she inherited the properties while pending Yibum, and the latter case is where she's still married to her first husband. These opinions argue with one another, and the remaining cases are discussed. New Mishnah. The mitzvah of Yibum falls to the oldest brother. If he's unwilling, you go to the younger brothers. If they're unwilling to do it, you go to the older brother and tell him to do Yibum or Chalitza. If it was deferred to a minor brother until he comes of age, or to an older brother until he arrives from overseas, or to a deaf, mute, or insane person, this is not allowed, and we force him to decide between Yibum or Chalitza. The Gemara cites a dispute between if it's preferable to do Yibum with a younger brother or Chalitza with the older brother. Some say Yibum with the younger brother is better, as the main obligation is with Yibum. Others say that Chalitza by the older brother is preferable, as they hold the younger brother has no obligation in doing Yibum at all. This is debated between these opinions. Others say that actually both say Yibum from a younger brother is preferable, and the dispute is actually between Chalitza of an older or younger brother as to which is preferred. Some say it's better if the older brother does it, as he has the obligation. Some say the preference of the older brother is only by Yibum. It just really doesn't matter who does it by Chalitza, and this is further discussed. There are further related points, including on the validity of certain forms of matzah on Passover. New Mishnah: if someone does Chalitza with his brother's widow in regards to inheritance, he's treated like all the other brothers. If the dead brother's father is still alive, the inheritance would go to him, unless the other brother did Yibum, in which case the inheritance would go to him. Others say it always goes to the father. The Gemara says that it stated that the brother who did Chalitza has the same inheritance as his other brothers, as you might have thought that he would have lost his inheritance as he prevented her from ever doing Yibum. We bring sources, and it says we follow the opinion that the inheritance always goes to the father, which is based on a verse which is discussed. New Mishnah: if someone does Chalitza, they can no longer marry each other's relatives. It lists several examples and says the other brothers can marry into the other family. Also, a man is allowed to marry the co-wife of the woman he did Chalitza with, but he cannot marry the co-wife of the relative of the woman he did Chalitza with. The Gemara asks if secondary relatives are also prohibited from marriage in a case where Chalitza was done. There are a number of proofs brought, but in the end we say from a source that they cannot marry secondary relatives. An additional rule, it says if someone has relations with the co-wife of the woman he did Chalitza with, the child born from this is illegitimate, which is based off of our discussion. Also, the difference between the woman's co-wife and her relative's co-wife is that the relatives go with the woman to court to get the Chalitza, so it was ruled that they're treated similar to the woman who received Chalitza herself. The woman's actual co-wife does not go to court, so they're not forbidden to marry. New Mishnah: if someone does Chalitza with a widow, and his brother then married her sister, and then dies, they must do Chalitza and cannot do Yibum. Similarly, if someone divorces their wife and his brother marries her sister and dies childless, she's exempt from Chalitza and Yibum. If a woman was pending her Yibum with her brother-in-law and then his brother betrothed her sister, some say we should tell them to hold off the completion of their marriage until the Chalitza is done. Even if the widow dies before they could do Chalitza, the siblings can still marry each other. If the brother-in-law dies, then the other brother must divorce his new wife and do Chalitza with the widow. The Gemara asks, we said similarly by the first two cases, where one was pending Yibum and the other was divorced, but the rulings are different. Some say it actually said however, not similarly. In fact, marrying the sister of a divorced wife is biblically prohibited, while marrying the sister of one who did Chalitza is only rabbinically prohibited. It also mentions that we rule like the latter opinion of the Mishnah. There's a dispute if someone is marrying the sister of a woman who is pending Yibum and his wife died, can he do Yibum with the widow? Some say yes, as she's considered a woman who was permitted, then forbidden, then re-permitted, so she reverts to her original status. This logic is further debated, and others disagree. New Mishnah: a woman cannot do Chalitza or Yibum until after 3 months of her husband's passing to see whether she's pregnant. This also applies to all the other previously married women, virgins, non-virgins, divorcee, widows, etc. Others disagree. Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't need to make such a delay after betrothal unless you're from Judea, as there was a concern that people were actually cohabiting with their brides during betrothal. Rabbi Yossi also disagrees, saying any previously married woman can immediately remarry, besides for a widow because she needs to mourn. The Gemara asks, out of concern of pregnancy, it makes sense to not do Yibum during the first 3 months, but why can't you do this after Chalitza? They're not even marrying. Some suggest this is another refutation of the opinion that you can do Chalitza while pregnant. Some suggest it's as the child could be born, retroactively removing the necessity for Chalitza and allowing the woman to marry a Kohen, which would need to be announced, which is debated. And others say it's as the verse seems to imply, that if you cannot do Yibum, you also cannot do Chalitza during that period either. This is further discussed, along with a related case. A woman by Yibum must wait 3 months, as she cannot get married to her brother-in-law if she was pregnant with child from the prior marriage. But what's the issue with all of the other women from marrying immediately after? So we say, based on a verse, that people shouldn't have ambiguous lineages. There are instances of this given, and some say the issue is that then people might accidentally marry their relatives if they don't know precisely who their father was. She must wait 3 months and not less out of concern that the pregnancy was delayed, which is described further. It also says, if you're certain the woman's pregnant, you still need to delay out of worry that if you are intimate while pregnant, it could damage the fetus. But what's the difference between normally cohabiting with your pregnant wife, which is permissible? There are a few answers given, and we say that if she becomes pregnant while nursing, it could mess up her milk, and with your own wife, the husband would pay for nursing alternatives, but there's a concern where it's not the husband's child that he won't provide an alternative, and she'll be too embarrassed to collect her funds from the prior marriage, and her nursing will be damaged and the child will die. These points are further described. It also covers some specific laws of impurity in regards to combs. In regards to waiting 3 months, several sources say you don't need to wait 3 full months, you can marry in the middle of the third. Some disagree. In the end, the ruling is that a nursing woman must wait 24 months before marriage, not including the day the child was born or the day she enters Erusin, the first stage of marriage, and a widow must wait 3 months, not including the day her husband died, and not including the day she enters Erusin. We said a widow must wait to marry as she's mourning, but why should that prevent marriage if she's allowed to even launder clothing, which based on another discussion by the fast of Tisha B'Av is shown to be more strict? It's discussed. We amend the Mishnah to be talking about the later final stage of marriage, so there's no comparison. This is further debated at length. There are a number of further suggestions offered as to the variance between cases. In the end, we say there's a difference between ancient mourning and current mourning, and also there's a difference between communal mourning and personal mourning, so the cases are really not comparable. New Mishnah. If 4 brothers were married to 4 women and they all died, their older brother is allowed to do Yibum with all of the wives. If one was married to 2 women and he died, doing Yibum or Chalitza with one of them releases the co-wife from this obligation. If one of the widows was qualified to marry a Kohen and the other was not, if the brother is doing Chalitza, he should do it with the disqualified one. If he's doing Yibum, he can marry whichever one he wants, obviously assuming he's not a Kohen. The Gemara clarifies the case and disputes a bit in verses which are discussed. The point on doing Chalitza with the disqualified woman is as Chalitza disqualifies a woman from marrying a Kohen, so you may as well do it to the woman that's already been disqualified, so as to not cause issues for another woman. New Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva holds that if someone remarried his divorcee after she had remarried, or if you marry a woman you did Chalitza with, or her relative, you need to divorce, and the child is illegitimate, a mamzer. The rabbis say the child is not a mamzer unless you're marrying the relative of your divorcee, in which case it is. The Gemara suggests that Rabbi Akiva actually also meant the relative of a divorcee, not the relative of a woman you did Chalitza with, which is supported based on some sources, but they're disputed, and in the end we say, no, he actually meant you're biblically forbidden to marry the relative of a woman you do Chalitza with, and there are verses brought to prove this. Some say everybody agrees that if someone marries their divorcee, their daughter cannot marry a Kohen, and this includes a later discussed opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Similarly, it's said, according to some, that everybody agrees that if a Canaanite slave or a non-Jewish person has relations with a Jewish woman, the resulting child is a mamzer. There's some debate as to who this opinion includes, and some disagree, saying their child actually is valid. This is further qualified along with some specific instances. There are a few more cases discussed in this regard. In the end, it says the final ruling is that if a slave or a non-Jewish person have a child with a Jewish woman, the child is still legitimate whether she's married or not. There are a few more related instances brought. There's some discussion on the process as to how a slave would convert. There's further instances on the requirements for conversion in general. Some say it's circumcision and immersion in a mikvah. Some say this immersion can be done on Shabbos, and it's further discussed. It also goes through many of the verses on this topic and further qualifies the exact process of conversion. You have to ask them why they want to and explain that being Jewish is actually extremely difficult with constant hardship and oppression, and if they still want to convert, we accept it, and we teach them the mitzvahs and their laws as to how they'll apply strictly to him now that he's Jewish, and that we don't receive abundance of good or punishment and other points, and if he still wants to convert, he's circumcised, and after he's healed, he immerses in a mikvah, and he's further taught the mitzvahs and obligations of being Jewish, and he's a Jew once he immerses. If it's a woman that's converting, she's immersed by women, and the people teaching the Torah and mitzvahs do it outside. We spend so much time discouraging potential converts, as if converts don't properly abide by the laws of Judaism, it's very problematic, so you gotta make sure people are really serious about joining first. Therefore, the points on this topic, further expounding on the sequence and the reasons. The points and sources are further discussed, and this is all qualified further. New Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva says a mamzer is defined as any child born from a cohabitation which violated a negative commandment. Rabbi Shimon HaTimni says it's a child born of cohabitation that is punishable by kares, which is what we hold like. Rabbi Yeshua says it's a child born of a cohabitation that is punishable by capital punishment from the court, and there are sources which support his view. If someone's wife died, he can marry her sister. If he divorced his wife and then she died, he can marry her sister. If she married someone else after the divorce and then died, he can marry her sister. If the woman you are going to do Yibum with died, you can marry her sister. If he did Chalitza and then she died, he can marry her sister. If after Chalitza she married somebody else and then died, you can marry her sister. The Gemara cites verses as sources for the different opinions as to what defines a mamzer. These are discussed along with some discussion as to how the prophet Yeshaya died. He was killed by Menashe, who wanted to kill him, as he felt he had prophesied falsely, so Yeshaya said God's name and was swallowed by a cedar tree, but then Menashe had the tree cut down, killing him. These verses are further spoken on. It also says, some say the last part of the Mishnah is actually redundant, and that's the end of chapter 4.